You are listening to TAP Therapeutic Astrology Podcast with me, Mana, and today I'm so happy to be joined by Dr. Bob Withers. Welcome, Bob.
Happy to be here with you, Amanda.
Good, and I'll introduce you to the listeners. So I found there's different introductions of you. I like this one from I Awake Technologies, where it says Dr. Bob Withers is a highly regarded addiction educator, recovery coach, author, and public speaker. And then it says something that I'd like to ask you about. So it says, over the course of his professional career, Dr. Bob has provided tens of thousands of hours of therapeutic counseling and recovery coaching to satisfied clients. And this is my question. Okay, so this is my question. I hope you can follow me when I ask. The thing is, so when I'm trying to gather my experiences into a resume, which you kind of have to do when you want to apply for a job, you want to take your experiences and kind of present it well. I'll say also that, in the last couple of years, I've had one-to-one clients. And but then when I read this, I was like, okay, this is probably a normal expression. For one, I'm aware of that. But I have a tendency to think about words. So I was like, could I say that I have had satisfied clients? And I was like, no, I don't think I could, and it led me down this path of when are we fully recovered in the healing work that, now I'm going to say we're going to speak specifically about your work, but also I know therapists are listening to this program. So all of us who are working in the healing field, when is the satisfaction there? Do you understand my question? Like, if I ask my clients, are you satisfied with this therapy? I'm not sure. Some come back, some don't, right?
It's a good question. It's a great question. You remind me of a story, and this came up probably 35 years ago. I had a client that came to see me. I've been working in this field for about 45 years, so I've been at it for a while. So I had a client that came to see me. She was a therapist herself, and I can still picture it very clearly, this particular meeting. And she said, Bob, when I came to see you, I had this and that issue. I honestly don't remember let's say there was anxiety. And, I've worked with you now. Let's say that we worked for 6 months. Again, but I do remember what she said. She said, my anxiety hasn't completely abated, but owing to our conversations, I have a different relationship to it now. And I'm really grateful to you for that. She says, as a therapist, I've been so focused on solving problems, the big move at that point in psychotherapy in the US was so-called solution-focused therapy. And I gave a conference presentation right about that same time, give or take a year or two. And the title of the presentation was, you're going to love it, it's a mouthful, solution-focused therapy versus the alchemical solutio. and the alchemical solutio, I was using the Latin term, it comes out of Carl Jung's work. The Latin term for solution is solutio. And in America, and I'll locate this in the US, and you can tell me if it applies to you in Denmark, there's such a focus on solving a problem and kind of from the top down. And even then, as a very young man, I was probably 30 or 35. I'm 68 now. I was suspicious of how easily we did that. I was teaching in the university. I was training therapists at the doctoral and master's level. And they come in, and I could understand, because it was 10 years before that I was starting graduate school. The assumption is that for a client to be satisfied, their problem would be solved. And I bought that to some extent, but life, and we'll talk about this today, man, life led me other places for sure. And I came to believe that this approach from the bottom up, the idea of the alchemical solutio is, just as you can solve a problem, you can be thrown into water where there's a dissolving, a solution, a dissolution. And that, what would it be like to give as much energy to dissolving the problem the way that we think about it as solving the problem the way we think about it? And this client was picking up on that. And I wrote that description you just talked about. I used that term. That wouldn't be a typical term in the US. I don't know that most people would say that. And
Okay.
if they said it, they probably wouldn't mean what Bob Weathers means by that. And so I could answer you from my heart because I know what I meant when I wrote that, however many years ago. The idea of satisfaction would have as much weight. It's not that I don't take solving problems seriously. I work for the last dozen years exclusively in addiction recovery. I'm really committed to recovery. Having said that, if we turn recovery into another thing to do, that could be creating more of the problem that led to the addiction to begin with. And so I'm very interested in the spirit of that early presentation. By the way, there were two people that showed up at my presentation at the conference. It wasn't a popular topic. I never forgot it. It's one of my favorite papers, but it just didn't grab headlines.
That's typical. Yeah.
The idea would be, what would it be to look at satisfaction in a deeper sense, in the sense of, and I'll tell you, the people listening today, even you, Manna, because we're meeting today for the first time in person.
Yes.
You'll have a felt sense of who I am if I show up, and my wish more than anything else is just to show up and be transparent to what runs through me. And the clients that stay with me, not all clients do, most do, but not all do. They just realize this guy, this alchemical solutio ain't for me. Having said that, there's kind of a self-selection process because most of my clients come through referrals of people that know me. And the clients that work with me, then we begin a process where I show up with as much heart and as much intelligence as I possibly can. And out of that, a relationship forms, a dialogue forms, and it's the relationship that satisfies. So it's less about let's extract this problem than can we commit to a certain way of being together with integrity, that at the end of our work, I'll tell clients the first session, man, saw clients right before the holidays, I'll say, if we only meet once, I want this hour to make a difference for you. And I'm not just saying that, I absolutely mean that. So whether we meet for 1 hour or we meet for 5 years or anywhere in between, the wish would be that there'd be transformation, not just for the client, but for me too, and that somehow or another we enter into holy space together. So that's how I meant satisfied.
I love it. I love it. Oh, I'm so glad that you also can take it far. Something small. I love it. Oh, and I'm happy that you actually had so much thought behind that. That way of saying it. Wow. Okay, that's good.
That's what you said. You said you take words seriously.
Yes.
I do. Sometimes I blow it. Sometimes I misspeak something or I miss a nuance of it. But I've got a fascination. Ever since I was a boy, I used to carry around a dictionary with me, which is odd. I acknowledge that. But I was particularly interested in word origins, and I still am. I'll look up words, and I'll actually keep track of them in my dictionary. What day I looked it up. Not only the word for the meaning, but where it came from. And I'm just absolutely fascinated by that. And I gather that you are too.
That is amazing. I wish I could say I am as much as you are, but I know your birth chart. And what you just said makes a lot of sense in terms of your birth chart. And having seen that, I know that my level cannot be compared to yours because I'll just share the configuration that I'm talking about is Mercury in its own sign of Gemini conjunct the South Node. It is has a lot to do with, for example, words and linguistics and knowledge, but also just like facts. And yeah, you were sharing about a dictionary, that's the sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have a lot of respect for your expertise, for example, in astrology and birth signs. Even though I don't have a great depth in that, I'll tell you, I was thinking of this morning. I swim every morning, and it's my quiet time, among other things. As I swim and I pray, that's my quiet time. I was swimming, realizing that we were meeting, and it came to me. I wasn't planning to tell you, but it makes sense that I would tell it to you, is that as we talk today, you'll see this, and I think you already sense it, is that I put a great deal of emphasis on what it is that calls us into the future, as well as its roots in the past. But I'm very interested in terms of addiction recovery, for example, and in my entire career as a psychologist, very interested in going deeply into why am I here? What purpose or meaning? What are my values? All of those kinds of things. And I feel like that puts us in the same neck of the woods, Manna, because
sure.
your care for historical and even cosmological context, I really share that, is that things aren't as they appear at the surface. And I really appreciate the fact that you take that as seriously as you do. Can I add a postscript real quickly? I think I wrote this to you, but I'm just going to do this for humor's sake. The day I was born, which was May 21st, 1955, some years ago, the music magazine, Rolling Stone magazine, which is a rock magazine, it's kind of preeminent rock magazine, they put out an article. It was called The Birthday of Rock and Roll, and it's my birthday.
Oh, man. Another win. Another win. Great.
The rock and roll guitarist went into a studio the morning I was born. I was born that same morning, probably about the same time, and recorded a song that became the first rock and roll hit, hence the birthday of rock and roll, hence the birthday of Bob Weathers.
Yep. I take that very seriously, actually. That is, I mean, because you are also doing music, right? You're also musical. So
lifelong passion. So
yeah.
The stars. I've been reading a favorite book that I'm reading for the first time, but it's already become a favorite book by a favorite author. Thomas More is a Jungian analyst here in the United States, and
that's the first person I interviewed on this one.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I was nervous like before and after and during, and
deeply honored. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Thomas.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm reading a book. I started it before Christmas. I'm reading it, and I'm reading it slowly, which means I didn't finish it by Christmas. You might be familiar with it. What a treasure. The book is simply called The Soul of Christmas. And in that book, he spends a lot of time, this also brings me to you, Manna. He spends a lot of time looking at the symbolism of the birth of Christ. And he understands it mythologically, which is to say, he understands it deeply. And he talks about the significance of the star over Bethlehem. Speaking of stars, and I feel like there was a star over my birth, and for which I'm very grateful. Each one of us has a star, and we'll talk about this in terms of recovery. But man alive, does Thomas More touch that in the tenderest and the most profound of ways. It's just a beautiful, and what I love about it, although he's a Catholic priest by background, a Catholic monk, he's in no way doctrinaire at all about very inclusive, as you know. And he says this book is for people of all faiths and people of no faith. He just completely opens the door. It's available to all humans. So what he's done is he's invited everybody to experience, just as it would be with Jewish Passover or any other, huge religious rite or symbol, is to open into it the way that he does. It's really meaningful. So the soul of Christmas, and I had a star over my manger.
Yeah, for sure. And Thomas More, he's just such a writer. I guess this is also something that connects you and I, the fascination with words and how precise you can say something. It enlightens, it makes my soul so happy when someone puts it into a sentence, how I've always felt,
It's a thing of great beauty, isn't it?
Yeah.
When I come in the mornings, I memorize poetry is what I do. I also use it for a time for my gratitude practice and my forgiveness practice and some things I do. I get a lot done in that half hour. I just swim for a half hour, but it's very meaningful. I start for about 10 minutes in the hot tub. I start with dessert first. I sit in the hot tub. I just listen to the birds and watch the sunrise.
Nice.
And then but I get to memorize poetry, and I get to memorize my favorite poets. And so two poets that have meant so much to me are Rumi and Lao Tzu. And so I've got a significant amount of their poetry committed to memory. But then I've also selected individual poems, and these are longer poems. Some of them are like a page or two, so it takes a while to memorize them. Pablo Neruda comes to mind, Rilke comes to mind, Yeats. I mean, there's just so many great poets. but I get what I love about reading the poets or the translations of the poets is exactly what you said. It's like the words, each word is so significant. I really appreciate it, spending this much time. I've done this for the last several years, of just really appreciating. These are masters of the craft, and Thomas More is one of them.
Yes, for sure. Okay, Dr. Bob, now let's get into your business, because I have so many things I want to talk to you about. So let's start with, so you've said a little bit about what is a satisfied, what is the satisfaction that we're aiming at? And as I hear it, it's not something that needs to be resolved. There's some dissolution. Now you called it dissolving, right? But as I hear it, it's not like there's not this end goal. But you talk about enslavement. So I'm guessing there is sort of a goal here of being freed up from that enslavement. Can you speak to just why you talk about enslavement?
Thank you for asking, man. These are meaningful questions to me too, and they continue to unfold. This conversation will be the latest kind of revelation of how this unfolds for me with you. If the Latin root of the word addiction is addictus, as you know, and addictus connotes a slave, or the way it's used in the Bible is a bondservant, somebody whose birthright has been sold. That's a bondservant. It's a very powerful set of images. And so I really, even though, at least in the US, the term addict has been kind of deleted from the lexicon, and I understand why, it's for good reason, is that there's so much stigma associated with addiction, and particularly being labeled as an addict. I would never refer to any individual as an addict. And we may go into more detail of why that's the case later. So I do get how it's problematic. The problem is if you throw out that word, then you throw out that connotation. The term that we use now, which is a medical terminology for what I prefer calling addiction, is substance use disorder. And that way of thinking about things sets up even a bit, I think, of what we were talking about. If I have a substance use disorder, then let's put some order in Bob's substance use. In fact, why don't we just delete his substance use? And it's just all kinds of connotations that I think deserve to be thought critically about and felt into. And so if those in the audience that are therapists that are aware of this change in the language in the last 10 years, well, please forgive me the use of the word addiction. When I present at conferences, I'll actually use the term addictus, just almost like set it aside. That's the Latin term. And that way people know this is what I mean by this term. Now, if addictus connotes enslavement, which is what you're asking about, then what might addiction recovery be about? What are we recovering? And this comes full circle with where we started for me, Manna, which is that what we're recovering is our birthright that was given away. And so there's not an end to that. There's not a problem to be solved. I was reading Thich Nhat Hanh this morning in my early morning quiet time before going to swim. I get up a couple of hours early and spend time, and I was just talking with my wife, Colleen, who's also a therapist. We were talking about this last night. It was New Year's Day here in the US, and Colleen and I have a tradition of going down to the beach and walking on the beach and having kind of a review of the past year and a preview, wishes and intentions for the new year. I love this tradition. And I was sharing with her, I can remember exactly where we were when we were walking across a bridge going to the beach, that were it not for these couple of hours each morning, in light of the gravity of the work that I do, and so many of us in this field do, it's a godsend for me to get up early, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning if necessary, to have time alone. Then I can work during the day and I don't burn out. I told you how long I've been in this field. It's about 45 years, and I sometimes joke with people. Well, I have to say this as an aside. My first supervisor, this is many years ago, was such a burnout victim. And I remember being very fearful because I'm a quite sensitive soul. Yes. I thought, how am I not going to burn out? It just seemed awful to me. And so if we flash forward all these years, 45 years after beginning my first job in the field of mental health, the joke is I tell people I don't really feel burnt out at all. I said, if there's anything, maybe I feel burnt in. That's not even an English phrase, but I feel burnt in.
I get it.
I, I feel really supported by this time. Well, recovering our
You can actually say that in a Danish word, burned in.
what is
It's called indebrændt. So
in
it's because it's like in burned, right? I use it quite a lot because I feel it often. So
I'll share a poem with you by Rumi. It's just a phrase from a poem. He says, "Last year I gazed at the fire. This year I'm burnt kebab." I even love the play on words, but the idea that we're not looking at the fire, we're actually in it and we're burning in the best of ways, in the best of ways. I'm grateful, and I really attribute this to grace that I've been in this field as well as my life during this time and have not burnt out. I've come close sometimes to giving up the ghost, and I'm really grateful because I feel really, really buoyed, really supported. And so back to,
yeah, were you saying something? Were you saying something about the walk on the beach with your wife before?
Yeah, what I was sharing was about recovering our birthright, and how it is that that's not a place that you get to. It's something that you cultivate. And it was in that conversation with Colleen that I was sharing that my daily cultivation, quite intentionally, I start off that way. My goal with clients that I'm working with is for it not to be work. It's serious. Let me say this. People used to ask me, man, they'd say, how do you not get depressed dealing with clients who are dealing with such pain in their lives? And I told them the truth, and I think there's a lot of truth to this. You know, what depresses me is not dealing with depth. That's what depresses me. And so the work I do is enlivening. Now, I do deal with hard content, anxiety, depression, addiction, you name it. But we're dealing down in the ground. We're digging in the ground together. And I right now my body had chills because that's how deeply I feel what I just told you. I'm so grateful to be doing work that doesn't burn me out, that is deeply, deeply soul nourishing. And I get to do that every day for a living. My dearest friend, long-term friend, besides Keith, who just passed away, was Jim Finley. Jim and I have been friends for 45 years. He's another person that you ought to have on your podcast.
Okay.
Jim is a dear soul. He's an author and a retired psychologist. We met in graduate school. Okay. And oh gosh, where was I going with that with Jim? This happens for me. Sometimes it goes a little bit too off.
But it's the same configuration that I mentioned before, the Mercury conjunct the South Node. That's what's doing this to you, Bob. It's the free association part of it. It's like it's such a huge curiosity and so many facts that you have gathered throughout the years, and so there's 1,000 billions of pathways for you to go down, and so it's
my only embarrassment is if I hold myself to something linear, which my face just got red, people can't see this, is that I'm embarrassed by this because of what you just said. And it's only if I stay attached to that. I want to share with them the poem that you and I shared before we began today. It's a short line from Rumi where he says, sometimes the names slip away. Like right now, I was talking about Jim Finley. I wanted to make reference to something and I lost the connection, for which I apologize. And it may come back or it may not. But Rumi says, sometimes the names slip away, but it's not forgetfulness. It's our being so absorbed. And there's a way that I feel, my experience is that I feel so absorbed that sometimes I forget where I was going and have to just trust that the depth will provide something else. I was sharing with you this morning that I began the morning reading Thich Nhat Hanh. Jim and I share a love for Thich Nhat Hanh, and he was talking about forgetfulness of being. And so what we recover in recovery is remembering or well, literally remembering who we are, regaining our birthright. And what gets us into trouble and what actually marks an addiction is that we forget who we are.
Mm.
There's good reason for that for most individuals, including myself, is that there's very few people that struggle with addiction that have not experienced significant trauma, loss, invasion of boundaries, et cetera, in their lives. And so you can understand why I would want to forget my being, because it's so painful. And so whether it's a behavior or a substance, anything that can help soothe that. I don't think that people start off their lives saying, my one aspiration in my life is to become the worst addict ever. I mean, no one wants that. But if you've experienced significant pain owing to your sensitivity and owing to your milieu, to your environment, then soon enough, you're going to be vulnerable to addiction. And it's virtually universal in the clients with whom I work. I meet with groups of people that are early in recovery, and I'll talk to them about adverse childhood experiences. And then I'll summarize what that might be. And then I ask for people to raise their hands. Is there anybody in the room? I changed it. Is there anybody in the room who has not experienced more than their perception, more than a typical amount of childhood adversity? There'll be virtually no one. In fact, there'll typically be one person out of 30, because that happens. Somebody, they say, my parents were great. I had no significant abuses growing up, and I just hang out with the wrong crowd and got myself into trouble, something like that. And I believe them. I don't doubt them. The fact is that we have reasons for forgetting our being. So my work is to be a midwife to help people very gradually to regain traction in their soul again. I trust that process. You'd be surprised, but maybe not, Nana. When I'm working with clients, we don't spend most of our time talking about alcohol and other drugs. We do talk about it. I'm not loath to talk about it. I'm quite familiar with the biology of addiction, and I really would like clients to be educated so as to reduce shame. But most of our time is talking like you and I are talking right now. We're talking about meaningful emotional experiences, relationships, goals in life that have been unmet, frustrated dreams. The whole range of things, existential factors, all of that. That's mainly what we talk about. The assumption is that if we can gradually begin to regain the soul, then the addictive behaviors become something that it might be attractive, but it's far less interesting.
Yeah. So, Bob, as you're speaking, I'm kind of connecting what you said about not being burned out and not being depleted from this work, because you said it's because it goes into the depth, meaning as I connected, then you're also saying if you were to be burned out, it would be because it was a work on the surface. And then there's this thread, and what you're talking about now, what is actually helping people, is also going into that depth. And then in order to do that, you have to not leave yourself, and you have to actually be there. Yeah.
I get to sit with people. Why I mentioned Jim, I just remembered, is that Jim talks about this. Jim is dedicated to contemplative practices, and he's world renowned for the depth of the work he's done.
Wow.
But Jim told me years ago, I mean, we were very young when I met him 40 years ago, that he felt like that doing therapy for him, he was becoming a psychologist, doing therapy 8 hours a day is like meditating for eight hours a day. And you get the truth of it by virtue of what you just said, Manna, is that if my single intention each day is to get myself right in order to be present with the client with whatever they bring, then my practice through the entire day, ideally, and I have many more good days than bad days for which I'm grateful. My goal is just to be present. And that means to be present means, I don't know how you want to define meditation or mindfulness, but you could do worse than define it that way, of just being radically present no matter what comes and just staying with that. And I get to do it in relationship. I'm with you. I get to connect with you. So what an honor to be able to be with people and be together down in the depths together. It's really, that's why I thought of Jim, because Jim has modeled that. Jim is extraordinary. All those years ago, I walked into his office one time. He and I were still both students. And Jim is very Spartan. I walked into his office, and there were literally two chairs, very simple chairs in his office. and a lamp on the stand. And that was it. There was no art on the walls. There was no furniture. And I walked in this particular day into Jim's office, and he was sniffling and blowing his nose. And I said, "Oh, Jim, I'm so sorry. How are you doing?" And he said, other than this cold, which is a pretty severe cold, other than this cold, I'm doing just fine. I never forgot that. That's probably 35 years ago. Who says that? Is that Jim could be with his cold and he wasn't denying that this cold stunk. But when he said he was fine, it left a lasting impression because I really felt for Jim Finley, it was fine. I've known him now all these years. Jim's wife passed away, sadly, right before COVID. And my wife and I began meeting with Jim frequently by Zoom a couple times a week out of support for him. We went through dark times together with him, and Jim continues to love Maureen deeply. I knew them well together. I was at their wedding. But Jim's fine. And he wouldn't lie. He'd say, "I really miss Maureen." And we talk about her every time that we talk. We talk every week still. We've done that for 40 years.
Wow.
We've had together for 40 years. It's a long time. You get to know somebody really well.
Yeah.
He really misses Maureen, and just as with his cold, so with this deep connection with Maureen, he's
Right.
really fine. And so
like,
that's to be with my clients when we're discussing things that are really fucked up, really
Yeah.
painful stuff, and drop into a place where we can also be at peace. I love the way that Eckhart Tolle talks about it. He says that when somebody dies, you can't possibly be happy, but you can be at peace. And I know that that's the case. I know that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah, so that state of being. No, I've definitely heard that therapy compared, being a therapist, in the role of the therapist being compared to meditation. Yeah, that's kind of the state you want to be in if you want to have this healing presence.
So if we want to address forgetfulness of being, which is what we're talking about recovering, let me just say a word real quickly. When I use the word recovery, my wife and I began leading a group out of our home some years ago, and we called it Recovery for Everyone. And the assumption is that we all know addictus. We all know ways that we forget our being, and have good reasons for that for the most part. We all know about being enslaved to habits or ways of thinking or emotional patterns
For sure.
that bedevil us. We all know about. There's no one who's free from that. And if that's the case, then we all could stand some serious recovery. And so, although much of my focus is with people that are in recovery from addictions to substances, I also meet with people that are in recovery from addiction to behaviors, eating ways that they don't want to eat, sex the way that they don't want to have it, spending money the way they don't, all those things.
Okay.
Even if somebody doesn't have any addiction to substance and no overt behaviors, then we're all addicted to attitudes of resentment and shame and jealousy, the things. And so we're all in the soup together on this, is what I say. And so what a privilege then to be with individuals where we're dropping down into a place where for today we're going to remember being as kindly and compassionately, as tenderly, as gently as possible. That's the work I get to do. How lucky. Who could be luckier than me?
Well, we are feeling pretty lucky that we get to listen and draw on all of your experience, really. So because I was wondering about that before meeting. I was wondering if you would consider my, let's say, former addictions as real addictions, right? Because sometimes when you know a lot about alcohol, you don't think that other addictions are as severe.
Is that there's kind of I found this really problematic when I was working in treatment centers. Before COVID, I was leading 14 groups a week in different treatment centers in Southern California, which is where I live. And with COVID, all the treatment centers shut down for obvious reasons. And so began working out of my home doing recovery coaching online. I had an office with my wife locally, but we closed it eventually after paying for it for a year and it was empty. We finally closed it. But leading the groups, what I noticed very early on is that there was a pecking order. Like if I was addicted to alcohol, which I was, by the way, then it wasn't that didn't make me as severe an addict as somebody who was addicted to cocaine, which I was also.
Exactly.
And if I was addicted to cocaine, that's not as severe as being addicted to heroin. And heroin's not as significant as being addicted to methamphetamine, and so on it goes. And I used to just bust our groups on this. I mean, I did it kind-heartedly, but like, can we just stop that shit, you guys?
Okay.
This vision of pecking order, or this is worse, or this is better. And I think I know where you're going, but I'll just be quiet, and you can lead me where you want to go, and we'll see what comes.
But exactly, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, I call it a hierarchy of suffering. It's like you didn't have it as bad as me, right? That's what you're kind of saying.
Can I quote you on that one? That's a beautiful term.
Yes. Yeah.
Suffering is worse than yours. I love what Lao Tzu says. He says, I'm not like ordinary people. I am more ordinary. The idea is that I don't suffer like everybody. I suffer more than everybody. Just as when we make those distinctions, So
Yeah.
hierarchy of suffering. That's great.
Yeah. Oh, he's so good. I have to always just think about it for a long time. Those kind of quotes. I'm like, oh, okay. But so, okay. So I've been very addicted all my life to sugar, and I recently stopped. And it's I think sugar is a funny one because a lot of people will have a laugh about it or smile about it because it's such a childish thing, right? But it can be really. I mean, when you need it constantly and it's so emotionally connected, I will, I do call it an addiction. I've also been addicted to sex and to porn, and I've definitely been addicted to I think you mentioned it in there before when you were listing them, some kind of emotional behavior around texting certain people.
Sure.
I'm not sure about addiction or obsession with those ones, but
Yeah.
still felt like something that I couldn't control that I had to do. And
Let me
okay, so I'm just
let,
yeah,
let me respond to something you said.
please.
It's touching to me. I really appreciate you saying what you said, especially in light of the fact that some people would. It actually, you saw the look in my face. It makes my heart heavy to think that people would make light of addiction to sugar or sex
Okay.
or being obsessed about texting somebody. Let me respond to the first two, because not everybody would know this. Many therapists would know it, but a lot of therapists don't have much more training in addiction and recovery than I had, which is I had one lecture in a 6-year doctoral program in psychology, which is, and the statistic in the US, it probably generalizes to Scandinavia, is that 1 out of every 2 clients walking in the door of an outpatient therapist is clinically addicted to substance, 1 out of 2. And one lecture in 6 years, you can imagine how ill prepared I was for that. I got addicted at midlife, so I didn't know addiction but from the books, because I had one lecture, and I didn't know it from my experience. By midlife, I began to understand it from my experience, which led me back to a much deeper, the last 12 years have been dedicated. These books that the audience doesn't see, these books are just all books on addiction, is that I've made up for lost time. Back to sugar and sex. If you think about it, and I'm sure you have, is that most of us, our first addictions are sugar and sex.
Okay.
That is the most common addiction, because when you start off as a kid, you don't have access to methamphetamine, but what you have access to is sugar. And so that was my first addiction. My second one was sex. Is that
Okay.
a child has access to their body, they can self-pleasure. And if I'm going to use technical language for just a second. If I'm dopamine deficient, one of the central theories behind the arising of addiction is dopamine deficiency, which means your body doesn't produce enough of so-called pleasure molecules. And so you're constantly kind of subclinically depressed or anxious. Is that if sugar gets you over that lip, over that threshold into feeling less anxious or depressed, then why wouldn't you take as much of that as you could, as regular as you can? And then if you add sex to the mix, because sexual pleasure is our most powerful dopamine release agent organically. Now, there's all of the drugs of addiction, starting with alcohol and all the others, they release more dopamine than sex, which is why people will get addicted to drugs and sacrifice sex and relationships for them. But that in the normal human sphere, if you think about it from a Darwinian perspective, if we weren't highly motivated by sex, then we wouldn't procreate. We might have one sexual orgasm ever and say, well, that's good. I had that experience. That's bucket list, and let's stop. Is that we need to have that being highly motivating. Sugar is right behind it because we need to survive. There's two most important drives are for our own individual survival, and what trumps that is the survival of our DNA. Sorry, it's not very romantic to talk this way, but from a biological perspective. And so sugar and sex are right at the core of that. There are very few people whose addictions didn't start off with sugar and sex. And so it makes me sad, actually a little bit indignant, that we would do what we do culturally, which is shame people for being addicted to sugar and being addicted to sex, because that's how it begins for all of us. Some people, owing to the fact that they've been spared suffering, maybe have less attachment to those. Some people soon enough graduate. So by the time that they're 7 or 8 or 9, I've got many clients that started drinking alcohol in what we call in the US elementary school years, and they graduated to weed by the time that they were in the latter part of elementary school, early junior high school. And so that just began to be part of the combination of things. The joke that I've had with clients is that, because I've always had clients in groups say, Dr. Bob, if alcohol doubles your normal, if alcohol is stronger than sex, all of us have a dopamine level, let's say, of 1. Sex will double it. That sexual orgasm will double it. Alcohol is more than that. Cocaine is 4 times your normal dopamine level. Heroin is 10 times. Methamphetamine is 12 times. And so people will also say, well, Dr. Bob, if I've been using cocaine, which is 4 times my dopamine level, wouldn't it make sense that I would just add the other things in? And we laugh about it together because it's laugh or cry. And I go, oh, yes, we will. My vision at some point would be to be having sex on a motorcycle, flying down the road, snorting cocaine, drinking alcohol. I mean, and having loud music playing. It's like, why wouldn't you add as many of those? And so sugar and sex start that way. You think about it, when people engage in addictive behaviors, they'll add that to the mix because it's tried and true.
Wow.
There's no shame in that at all, Nana. And what I want to do is I want to congratulate you for being open and transparent with me, because when we're able to talk the way that you and I are talking, the same for me. I didn't start off this way, but now I'm an open book about it, because I want to make it where it's part of the normal conversation. If we really do mean that all of us know addictus firsthand, and that all of us are in need of remembering who we are, that is to recover our birthright, then can we please stop hiding in the shadows the reality that all of us know addictus from the inside, and all of us could use some support for one another to help us get back to recovering who we are.
Oh God, there's no room for all of my comments, so I have to just pick a few for what you just said. The first one, I really do know shame, but in this case, around just taking, I think sex is different. There's a lot of shame with that, but around sugar, I feel more that it's, like you say, it's so normal that can it even be considered as something that you are dealing with as such a problem? Right, so it's more to the facing of not being taken seriously.
Yeah.
Do you see it because it is so normal?
Here's a piece that just came together for me right now with you. So thank you. That's how this way of conversing is so meaningful, and this is not unlike the therapy that you and I do. Is that there are new discoveries being given. What just came to me, and I want to say shame on me, and I say shame in italics. Shame on me for times in the past where I've made this comment, and I have made it, and I'm regretting it. I've said, I'll say to a group of people that have been addicted to meth or heroin. That's typically the groups I've led, are people with serious addictions to serious substances. And what makes them serious is that they have such high relationships to dopamine release is that once you go down that rabbit hole, it's nearly impossible to get out of it because it trumps everything. There's nothing in the natural sphere that can compete with the dopamine release of cocaine, heroin, or methamphetamine, much less fentanyl. Okay, so there's that going on. And so I've said this, Manna, and I'm going to take it back and I will not say it again. I've said, you guys know that when somebody says, I'm addicted to chocolate, that they have no flipping clue what you're talking about. There's a way that's true, but what I've just done by that comment is I've relegated those that are addicted to chocolate to being shamed. And I take that back and I'm really apologizing for any time I've used that. Because the fact of the matter is that if I'll just use cocaine because I've done a lot of cocaine in my past. If cocaine is 4 times my normal dopamine level, sugar is 1.5 times my normal dopamine level. It's just a matter of degree. So if I'm addicted to chocolate, I get a half more boost to my dopamine level with chocolate. Cocaine will quadruple it, and if I combine the two, you can do the math on it. So the fact is that it's not okay for me to have said what I said, and I take that back. Is that a person could be as addicted to 1.5 with food, sugar, chocolate as they can be to any substance. Am I right about that? I mean, I really.
You are. This is really touching me.
I will not ever say that again. It's touching me too. The short-sightedness. The crazy thing about being a human being, particularly in this field, but in life, is that your judgments get revealed again and again, and you just kind of keep owning this. That's a judgment I've made that I will not repeat that, and I thank you for that. And I'm really, really sorry. It makes me want to cry for the times I've used that. Because I'm talking to people that have been addicted to chocolate, which is all of us.
Yes.
All of us.
Yeah.
That. Let's just get real. And then some of us have been addicted to meth and cocaine. Okay, so be it.
Yeah, but I understand the comment as well, and because it blends in with normal culture. And what do you mean? Sometimes we exaggerate, with saying, "Oh, I'm addicted to chocolate," and we don't maybe mean actually addicted, right? Maybe it's just something that we say. So I could understand your response because you want this field to be taken seriously and to for other people to know what suffering is a part of this. But then there is a side of food disorder, sugar disorder, call it what you will, where you constantly have to go to the candy store. And I even say it with a smile because it seems so childish, but it starts as a child, for sure. For me, absolutely. It just never stopped again. Coping with emotions that way. And that's actually, I have to sort my questions. I have 2 important questions for you, at least. Before we stop, one of my questions was
real quickly, Manna.
Yeah.
Thought here, if it helps relax us a bit, let me answer your questions. And
yes,
if with your permission, have me come back again where we can do this again. I love being with you. I said it a minute ago, and I think I interrupted you. I can see psychotherapy research has identified people that are therapeutic personalities. And there are plenty of therapists that are not therapeutic personalities, and there are plenty of non-therapists that are. Now, I'm not presuming whether you're a therapist or not, but you're definitely being presence, and I think of your presence as being a therapeutic personality. Having said that, I feel very matched with you in this conversation. So if you would, if I don't know how it works for you in your schedule, if you had me come back another time or another time,
I would love to.
I love this way of talking. We're doing it right now.
Great. Love it. Of course, I would love to. And just to please the curiosity, I'm studying to become a therapist. So
that's great.
Yeah,
in
training.
Lucky field, lucky clients, lucky satisfied clients.
But that's the thing, because sometimes I'm thinking this works and the client may not know. Sometimes we are not friends, but what we're going through is actually helpful. So that's okay. Let's see if I can. Let me ask you the other question that I was thinking about before, because that's the important one. I feel I really want to, if possible, if you want to. Could you share the period where you called it in midlife, where you got addicted because that's how I found you, from that story, and that touched me so much, and I've shared it with my friends, and I don't think I got the details right, but also I know that sometimes when you share a sensitive thing, you don't want to keep talking about it, so
Fine with me.
maybe just in
Yeah, I give you the brief version, and
brief version,
maybe you can
could
put a
you?
link to my website for
Yes.
listening, because they can read the story that's written in prose. Even that's a very brief version. And maybe when I come back, we can elaborate. I'm happy to talk about it, even though the content is not happy. The result is
Yeah.
deeply, deeply meaningful. And so,
Yes.
in a nutshell, everybody's path to serious addiction is different. Just in a nutshell, I'll put it in Jungian terms. I didn't do this on the website, but it will help make sense. Because of the chaos I grew up in, Manna, in my family, I resorted to being what Carl Jung and the alchemists would call albedo. I resolved to be white. And so I was lily white throughout childhood into young adulthood, which meant that I was probably every mother and father's dream of who they would want to be with their daughter or son or whoever like that. It is that my entire family there was such darkness. There was so much that went on, is that it was my saving grace to be a star. And so I was the best student, the best athlete, the best musicians, the most spiritual,
Right.
all this stuff. And I say all of that. I used to be proud about that, but it's a mixed bag. And I'll tell you why. Is that I started studying psychology at age 21, and finally got into therapy when I started graduate school 2 years later, and began digging into this. So it isn't like I didn't do work on my trauma, but eventually my being identified with what I'm going to call the white, which would be devoid of really conscious relationship to one's shadow, it came back, and it came back in many, and Carl Jung writes about this, it came back with a vengeance. And so I went from the first, I sometimes break it down this way, the first 30 or so years of my life being identified with white, to the next 30 years being much more identified with black. That would be the alchemy. Negredo. They're just used as contrast, which meant I not only began to engage with shadow more consciously, but I went right off. I broke on right on through conscious engagement and became quite unconsciously identified. So I don't know what you don't call it an angry young man if you're 40. So I was like an angry middle-aged man, and that had a lot, there was a lot getting expressed there, most of it unconsciously. And only in the last 5 to 10 years of it did I begin to realize there's a problem. I thought this is just the rest of my life. It felt like such a relief after having cut off all of that to engage with that. So the pendulum swung to the opposite extreme. And that's my midlife. As I think of the middle 30 years of my life, from age 30 to age 50, 55, as being pretty identified, I just rounded off to 30, being identified with being dark. Now, what happens in so much recovery, and if I could get one thing through today, this would be the most important thing for me to say, is that, and it goes back to where we started today, Manna. The typical move in recovery here in the US is that if you're identified with black, which by virtue of serious addiction is itself an example par excellence of the Negredo, then the move would be, then we need to whiten you back up again, Bobby. And so the move is then let's get white again. And you know from our conversation how I'm going to feel about that. That's applying solution. Let's solve the problem of addiction by getting you white again. And I got involved in self-help support groups here in the US. I was involved in 3 different programs. And one common denominator that left me wanting is that no one's addressing that there's a lot of value that I gained in this acquaintanceship with darkness, and I don't want to cut that.
Yes.
So hang with me, hang with me. So Jung, following the alchemical, he studied the ancient alchemists that were kind of like proto-chemistry. And once modern chemistry came, alchemy kind of receded, except that he saw it as a psychological metaphor, just as with the mythologies that we're familiar with. He saw it as a psychological metaphor, so that if one moves, in my case, which is kind of opposite of most people, I moved from white to black. The move isn't back to white. The move is towards an integration of black and white. And in the alchemical way of understanding, the integration of black and white is not gray, it's rubedo, it's red. And so the move is towards integrating those. Now my body's got the chills again. So the last 12, 13 years, and I hope I have about 15 more years. So the last 30 years of my life will be identified with growing more and more consciously into rubedo. I've got a cup in front of me. I have coffee cups with poems on them. This is a poem with Rumi on this side. He says, I'm like a ruby held up to the sunrise. Is it still a stone or a world made of redness? To see how red we can become, which is to say, you don't resolve addiction by becoming white. You resolve addiction ideally by becoming red. And so that marks the heart of my work. And it wouldn't be for all clients. There are plenty of clients that just want to get themselves clean of the addiction once and for all and do that. And that's fine. That's not my calling. Those are not my clients. The clients I work with, and they can see this, it's embodied in what we're talking about. The way we just talked about sugar and sex.
Yeah.
Rather than being phobic about it or splitting it off, can we find a way to understand and consciously relate to sugar and sex and every other thing? About half my clients use abstinence from all addictive substances. They stop drinking, whatever like that. I got another half of my clients that work on moderation because that's what they lost in active addiction. And so that they begin after a period of abstinence to begin to engage more consciously with substances because I've got clients that really value altered states. And how do you do that with moderation? Now, I'm going to piss off a lot of people I know that are into recovery equals abstinence, but that's not my population, nor is that my calling. My calling is for some kind of balance, and it's not like equal parts white and black. It's white and black together, and that equals rubedo. I hope this makes some sense. It's less esoteric living it than it is speaking about it.
For sure, for sure, as it is with many things, unfortunately. I wish living in practical terms was as fun as the abstract ideas we can talk about. But oh, this is so good, very, very moving. Lots to think about in there. I'm definitely in the abstinence years still. Like, yeah, taking a break from it. But I hear you that the moderation is, and it definitely makes a lot of sense what you're talking about with integrating the shadow. And because what really moved me the first time I heard about your story was, I don't remember it in details, and we will not go in depth into it now, but just that you had already made it.
Yeah.
You had already made it. You were on the top, and then the addiction took over.
I like what Rumi says. He says, many demolitions are actually renovations. It was an absolute demolition for me. It was a loss of everything that I'd been identified with. And it nearly took me out. And it took years and years for me to be able to experience the truth of what I'm saying to you right now in terms of renovation. I'll tell you this, man, and tears will rise up for me for sure, is that when I think about going back to where I was in what I'm referring to as albedo, is that would I want that? Would I want that job? Would I want those relationships? Would I want that level of consciousness and what I can contribute out of that? And there's no way. I don't wish the suffering of that middle phase, the negredo. I don't wish that suffering on anybody that I love or anybody that I touched in my life, students of mine or clients of mine. I wish I could somehow erase that. I can't do that. And I wouldn't mind taking some of the suffering away from myself because it was dark. It got really dark.
Yes.
Having said that who Bob Weathers is on this side of it, I am so incredibly grateful to be in this. And I know that for me, I couldn't have learned this out of a book. Some people maybe can. I was thinking of it this morning, no, I was speaking to you. And I think some people are preternaturally gifted just to get this stuff maybe at birth. I wasn't. It took me 50 years to begin to get an awareness of this is what I want to inhabit. It's not one or the other. And I'm so grateful for having gotten that in this lifetime, because there's no guarantee that any of us get this in a lifetime. So grateful. The rest of it is cake, is what we say in English. It's just, it's all cherry on top of the sundae, because the pearl of great price is I was given this. And I'm so grateful for that. There's another favorite line from Rumi where he says, only the true favorites get hunger for their daily bread.
Right.
And I've known, and you have too, anybody that suffered and suffered consciously, and we can consider ourselves favorites. if the hunger delivers us to uh, to an openness, to a curiosity, to a capacity to be compassionate, to an ability to contribute, then I want to say thank goodness for this. It's like when you choose to fast, your Rumi says your belly and your brain, they burn clean. And I'm grateful for the cleaning out that happened. It was extremely painful. Plenty of people die, so I don't take that for granted. Plenty of people contract into white. Plenty of people stay stuck in black. And I feel completely graced to be having this conversation with you and be speaking my truth. I'm so incredibly grateful. I feel really fortunate.
That's amazing, Bob. Thank you so much for sharing. What a moving conversation.
You know as well as I is that this conversation can't happen in a vacuum. One of my first experiences when teaching in graduate school, I was going to be out of town for a week, so I recorded a lecture. First time I ever did it in front of a camera for it was ungodly. It was like an hour or two lecture. And I one time went back to review it and it looked like a dead man talking. It was really depressing to me. And so this is the opposite of it. A conversation like this where there's receptivity, it's like a third created and it's completely a function of mana plus Bob. And I'm
Yeah, but you know what I'm gonna say. You know what I'm gonna say now. That's your birth chart. That's the Mercury. You have to look into Mercury because you're all about Mercury. That you need the dialogue. You need other people.
Nation because you know it well, and I'm like the blind leading the blind. I am very interested in reading more about it to help make sense of this life of mine. Since my background's in psychology and philosophy, I do a lot of reading in those areas to make sense of my life. But I could really use some serious astrology, like an infusion.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Who couldn't? Okay, Bob. Our hour is up. Thank you so much. I usually take a screenshot. Can I just do that real quickly?
Yeah.
See, yes. See, I always look focused, and then the guest smiles, and that's the same here. Great, perfect. Okay, thank you so much.
Man, it's been
and we'll meet again.
Blessings to you. One day we'll talk about your home and your land. I have a lot of respect and love for Denmark. Oh, it was only there, I guess, one time in the south of Denmark, and then do you say Jutland up in the north?
Yeah, Jutland, yeah. Jutland, yeah.
Yeah, I was there one summer during the jazz festival. I'm a jazz lover, and so it was like heaven for me. And I loved the whole vibe of it. I have a deep love for Scandinavian music, particularly jazz, Swedish, Norwegian, Danish, Finnish, Estonian.
Wow.
Seriously, in the U.S., I might be the one person that has the deepest love for your native music, particularly in the jazz area. So it's just an honor to meet with a Dane.
We have a lot of funny things going on here. Our queen just abdicated.
I read that just this weekend. 83 or something like that. She's abdicated after 50 years plus. That's amazing.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's cool stuff. Have a good
studies, okay? All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.